I don't know. Okay, there it goes. Hi, Kelly.
Hello, Mihi.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about why you were so into this passage. I know that you're planning on preaching it this week.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't like super taken with it at first, because I think I tend to read passages like this, and my first thought is like, oh, we're going to talk about things being thrown into the fire and burned. Like this is not the direction I want to go in. But I grew up in Eastern Washington in Spokane, and so whenever something pops up in the lectionary that has anything to do with grapes or wheat, which are two huge regional crops, I tend to kind of go for it because I know that like it feels like home, and especially serving a church in Michigan right now, which feels a little displaced for me at times. I like to, I mean, my church could tell you I preach way too much on like farming practices from my home community, which is not helped by the fact that John, my husband, works for a farming company right now. So I preach on farming sort of an indecent amount for someone who has no actual hands-on practical farming experience in my own life. But, you know, it
Yeah,
makes me feel like I'm at home for a little while.
yeah, I like it. I like that a lot. Um, so, what are the themes that are coming out for you in this passage?
So I love pretty much any passage that has to do with like plants, especially cultivated plants in scripture, because they tend to touch, especially this passage touches really well on questions of seasonality. And then also this one specifically brings up pruning, which is kind of an image I've been sitting with for a while recently. And they're definitely different but interrelated. So for me, seasonality is something that's become something of a mantra, like in my parenting, but also in my life as a solo pastor and as a spouse and a sister and a daughter and everything else. I just sort of view almost everything in my life as a season. Like, you know, the
Yeah.
kids are, I don't know, sleeping through the night, which is super great. And I remind myself it's a season and this will end at some point in time. Or if something really horrible is going on, like we're having, you know, tons of potty accidents or whatever, I just remind myself, like, this is just a season. Like, by the time they're fourth graders, we're not going to be dealing with pooping our pants anymore, I hope. And, you know, there's something sort of helpful for me about realizing that things always change, and
Mhm.
that part of being a mom or a pastor or anything else and doing that well is just my own ability to be flexible and adjust to the needs of the season that my family or my church or I myself am in, and what that is going to ask of me. Um, and yeah, so that's sort of something I live with a lot. But when I was reading this passage, I was also thinking about, I mean, it talks a lot about like bearing fruit and being fruitful, and otherwise you get cut off and thrown into the fire and whatnot. But I was sort of thinking about this idea that there's no such thing as a plant that's fruitful all the time. In fact, that's like
Mhm.
totally unhealthy to try to force plants to be constantly fruitful.
Mhm.
And being fruitful for a lot of plants, especially for grapes, is actually a very short sort of season. Grapevines, like wheat fields and like other things, need to have these long, dry seasons where they sit fallow and nothing's happening. And then they have these long seasons where all they do is they grow leaves. Or like the grapes themselves start out like really tiny and sour, and they take a long time to mature to the point where their sugars are developed to the right amount, whether they be for eating or for making wine or whatever else. And that when the fruit is ready, it happens all of a sudden. And it's usually like most, if not the entire vineyard. And you
Mhm.
have a very short window in which to actually go out and pick all this fruit that's on the
Mhm.
vine. And I think sometimes we read about being fruitful and we think we have to be productive
Mhm.
all the time. But in actuality, plants are fruitful for in a truly productive sense very, very little of their whole life, and most of their life is spent in preparation for those moments. And I don't know, there's something about that that resonates with me as someone who likes to constantly have something to show for my own work all the time.
Yeah. I remember like the list that you have, your dry erase board and
Oh my gosh, yeah, my ridiculous dry erase board. Like there's something
oh,
to me about checking boxes. Like it's
yeah.
just, I want to be able to check boxes, and that's not always a healthy way to live.
Well, it's a good way to stay organized, but yeah, I could see how, it's a little bit of a metric for productivity, and
Yeah.
I really like that image a lot and that realization that we don't have to be bearing fruit all the time. And I kind of feel like that's something that we kind of impress on our kids a little bit too much too. Like you have to be productive and you have to be making something or creating something. And I don't know
Oh,
about you
yeah.
all, but we always bring home boxes and like crates, like like a dumpster full of artwork. I shouldn't say dumpster, but I can't think of anything that's like a really big container.
Well, let's be honest, most of my kids' artwork ends up in the dumpster anyway. Not that they aren't, little Picassos, but
Right.
yeah, like 6
Yeah.
paintings a day from school. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
no, it's a little bit too much. I mean, and like Desmond has gotten into this thing where he just wants to draw like one Desmond on a piece of paper. It's just like, like the circle face with like the limbs,
Yeah.
and it's just like one on one piece of paper. So he'll do like 20 of those and bring them home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder what that is. And then it's just this whole like, oh, let's see it and let's hang it up. And um, I find it really encouraging and refreshing to realize like, okay, we don't have to be producing. We don't have to always be showing. That there is that it's even more important to have, um, like that fallow time that you said.
Yeah, and I think especially with like little kids, this is something I don't know, like we have some friends who come over and I really love them. I think they're fabulous and are great parents. But their son, who's just a little older than my 4-year-old, Enoch, is in one of these schools where, like, at the age of 5, they like spend time every day sitting and writing in their journal, and they're like reading all these long books. And like his parents are constantly like love to tell John and I about all the wonderful like academic achievements of their 5-year-old. And
Yeah.
John and I are sitting there like, I just I don't think that's what we want for Enoch right now, because there's going to be plenty of time for that kind of learning, but I don't know, it doesn't always resonate, and I worry sometimes that what we equate as being productive, as parents gauging our own kids or as workers or whatever it ends up looking at. I often wonder, is that really productivity that we're measuring, or are we measuring the appearance of productivity?
Yeah.
And which is actually more helpful? I don't know. I'm especially noticing this now because Enoch just got glasses, and we discovered we had no idea. There were no warning signs, nothing that was happening, but he's like basically blind in his left eye, we discovered. And we were really lucky to catch it. It was something that we only caught because we took him to the ophthalmologist to get his eyes checked. And, I sort of sat there and thought, if we hadn't caught this now, when he did start working more intently on reading and writing skills in the next year or two, that would have really been easily chalked up to like an attention issue or a learning issue, or little boys just don't like to focus on this, rather than understanding he actually could not see the page in front of him. So I don't know, it feels like in some way related to productivity, being able to give ourselves the space also to allow for new and unexpected things to occur that need to be addressed. I don't know, just something I'm sort of sitting with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fits with the whole, we need to trust in these sort of seasons. And I forgot that there are such things as good seasons and bad seasons. For some reason, I always tend to think of seasons like it's a way for me to frame sort of a bad kind of situation.
Yeah.
So I think like there's an end in sight, like this is just a bad season. This is a season. But there are good seasons, and it's but those are temporary too, and I think that I don't know, maybe leaning into it, not to steal Sheryl Sandberg's language or whatever, but leaning into sort of this I think maybe there's something about our bodies are meant to follow these seasons and have that kind of rhythm. And we
Yeah.
fight against it. We always feel like we need to be on like like on a major high all the time or something. Um,
Yeah. And I think especially as parents, I don't know. I think probably this isn't related just to parenting, but parenting is sort of my world right now.
yeah.
So, it's the water I'm swimming in. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking about this idea that like I recently had to back out of a little pastoral leadership cohort program that I was really excited about. And professionally, it was a really, really good decision for me to be a part of. But I just sort of finally realized, like, I'll have a 4-month-old at the time. And while on one hand, I am fully capable of traveling with a nursing infant, on the other hand, like, I've been gone a lot so far this year from my other two kids, and my husband is feeling the strain of that. And it was just one of those decisions that the longer I thought about it, the easier it became to say, this does not fit with the season that I am in right now. And it was a really sort of hard and painful decision because professionally it felt like the right choice. But at the same time, I had to take a step back and say, like, for the season my family is in right now, this is the choice that honors that vocation in my life, and my call to be present with my family. And that there will be other opportunities. Like, this wasn't the last
Mhm.
great, professional
Yeah.
development piece that I was ever going to be invited to, and it's not going to irrevocably destroy my career not to
Oh,
do
right.
it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. So it's just sort of been a way of inserting a little bit of patience into my world, which is, I'm not always
Yeah.
super patient. So, oh well.
Yeah, no, no. I think I get that, and I see that in you a lot. And I think I feel it too, to a certain extent. But I mean, you definitely have that drive, and I think that you have so much energy. So there's like, I'm just thinking about like, yeah. I mean, you make a good point in terms of there's a difference between being capable versus, I don't know, what would be sort of like what I'm thinking of right now.
What's
What
the
other?
wise decision
Yeah.
versus, yeah. And I think that's hard for me because I know my own limits, and I know I'm capable of things. It's not always the best decision, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And then that was actually the other piece of this passage, to be the good pastor who brings us back to scripture after all, that, kind of stuck out to me is this image of pruning, um, was really impactful to me when I sat down to start working on this passage this week, because I really feel like that's a lot of what's happening in my world right now and what I'm sort of starting to allow to happen. And so the reason you prune, like a grapevine, is because the grapevines, like other plants, have this tendency to send out lots of suckers in lots of different directions, and have all sorts of little branches. And the more branches they have, they're sending all this energy from their root system to many different places. And so when you go and you cut off the smaller branches that aren't producing as well, what you're allowing the plant to do is actually put all of its energy from its roots into the main vine that's growing really well. And so sometimes I read this passage, and the thing that comes to mind when they talk about, like, chopping off the branches and throwing them in the fire and whatnot, I sort of think we have a tendency to read that like, well, I'm going to be the good vine, and I'm going to produce
Mm,
things because I love Jesus, and that person over there, they're the bad branch who doesn't love Jesus the same way I do, so they're going to get thrown into the fire, and I'm going to be,
yeah.
the good vine attached to Jesus, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. But I really wonder if this passage is more about the fact that we all have both the good, productive vines in us, and we all have the tendency to grow these bits and pieces of ourselves that are not productive, not
Mhm.
fruitful. And it
Yeah.
might just be not fruitful for a season, but those things need to go so that we're not putting our energy
Mhm.
toward things that for right now don't matter. They aren't life-giving to us or to the world. And so I love this image of pruning. It's painful, and there's something kind of harsh about it, but
Mhm.
the outcome is good. And I notice this, like, I think as a parent, it's also easy to see this in the sense that, um, I'm always intentionally making choices for my kids about things that they're not going to do because it's just too much. It's too much on our calendar. It's too overstimulating for them, whatever it happens to be. I'm constantly simplifying their existence so that they can focus on what is most needful or important in our family life or in their life right now. And it's a process of pruning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, but it's painful.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It is painful. There is like this sense of, there's always something that you're giving up, something that's either being taken away from you or something that you have to put on hold, or, just paring down all the stuff and the noise or whatever.
Yeah. The other day, so John works at this company where they use like satellite imagery and rainfall data and weather and all these different data points. And then he's the head of research and development. And they take all this data and they put it together, and they then give it back to farmers to try to help them make the right decisions for their individual fields based on the actual like data science behind farming. And so John was telling me one of the hardest things with farmers is that if they have two fields, one that's producing, say, like 50 bushels an acre and one that's producing 80 bushels an acre, farmers' natural inclination, and this is totally human, I get this, is that they're going to want to put more fertilizer and more time and energy and more seed into that 50 bushels an acre field to try to get it up to where the 80 bushels an acre field is. And John said what they're noticing in the data more and more is that that field that's already producing at 80 bushels an acre has proved itself to be a more fertile field. So you are better off putting your time and labor into the 80 bushels an acre field because you, for the same amount of time and energy, that 80 bushels might become 120 bushels, whereas your 50 bushels, you might only get up to like 60 or 70 bushels. So you have an exponential growth in a more fertile field. And I was just sort of thinking, well, and then I was like, oh, that's a great sermon illustration. And then he gave me like a 30-minute lecture on agronomics and like all the like variations of, all the ways that this actually works. And actually I was like, I don't care about this, John. I just need the illustration for a sermon, right?
Yeah.
But it's sort of like it resonated with me in the sense of like that same image of pruning, like putting our energy toward the areas that are already life-giving for us and where we already feel gifted, and sitting with our kids or our churches or what have you in those spaces where we already feel life, rather than constantly putting our energy into those areas where we know we need improvement. And I'm not saying ignore it entirely, but at the same time, it's not going to give us the same feedback's the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not going to give us the same result for equal or more energy than those life-giving areas. I don't know. Yeah. Obviously, farming kind of works for me right now where I am in my life.
No, definitely. I think a lot of people would be able to, it's like farming, it's gardening. I mean, even just something about sticking your hands in the soil and, getting the weeds out and,
which the great irony of this is I actually hate yard work. Like, honestly, if I could do away with having a yard at the manse that I live in right now, I would be perfectly happy. I hate yard work more than anything. I just sort of like to, poetically dwell in the images of working the land, even though I have no intention of doing it myself.
That's so great. I love it. Just watch other people do it.
Yeah, I want to glean from their experiences.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. Was that me or was that you?
Oh, that was me. I think that was my phone.
Oh, okay.
Always dinging away at me.
I know. Okay. Well, you know what? I think I'm trying to see how long this was. It wasn't terribly long, and that's always better. I don't know how to tell like how long something was. Well, we've probably been on for like a half hour. Maybe it's over here. Sorry, I'm just kind of figuring this out as I go.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Ooh. Um, okay. Yeah. So, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of edit this down and then write some reflections tied to our conversation around it. Um,
Yeah.
and then would love to insert some everydayness from the Shriver household, or the Shriver day,
Yeah.
if you have a chance.
Yeah, I'll try to get some this afternoon. I keep forgetting to do it, but I'll take care of it this afternoon.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that sounds good.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the broadcast.